Would love to get your thoughts on our big story today. Google reportedly pulling Huawei's Android license after President Trump blacklisted the Chinese tech company. Is that a smart move on the part of Google, do you think?
Well, Alexis, it's not really separate from the trade war after all. I think these are intimately connected issues. One of the things that hasn't been pointed out in our discussion about this, late breaking sudden news is that one of the reasons it might well have happened, not only the pressure from the Trump administration, but also the fact that it's been known for almost about a year now that Huawei has been moving very close towards launching its own operating system called Kirin. It has its own not only operating system that's been under development for some time, but also the full spectrum of the ecosystem, including chips. So from the hardware side and the software side, they've been moving in this direction. And they have said, actually, since earlier this year, that they are, quote unquote, ready to deploy this ecosystem, again, their own operating system as well. Obviously, this was a so-called plan B for them, not something that they would want to have to do, but something that they are now going to have to do. Then the question becomes, in the short term, are they going to be able to make those adjustments in terms of having the availability of certain apps, obviously not the Google ones, but can they replicate in a way for all of their users the convenience of the Google OS and ecosystem? And that is something that's going to take time. Now, we've seen this before in the sense that in a parallel set of processes and with chips, with what happened to ZTE, very, very suddenly last year, their access to their major chip suppliers in the United States was also cut off through those export control measures. And that obviously brought that company in almost to a standstill temporarily. The further out you look, though, however, what we see is that even technologies like Android are substitutable, right? It means that they are going to find a way to go on their own, so to speak. They'll either rely on their own operating system, use Linux or variants of that to make sure they have that business continuity for their company and for their customers.
Parag, how bad could this trade war, or how bad could things get for Apple? Apple relies significantly on China, but are you looking at a potential price increases for their phones? They're going to have to move their supply chain. How should an investor think about this?
Right. Unlike Google, which, of course, is truly global, of course, is everywhere and hasn't been able to operate or generate, sales, substantial customer base, obviously, or users of its browser and ad revenue and so forth in China. Apple is very different. So you're right to point that out. Now, I think, again, well before the trade war began, we could see the warning signs for Apple. There's been a slowdown, a deceleration of sales and revenue in China simply because China is rich. Every Chinese person has a phone or two. And the Apple iPhone, of course, is very expensive compared to some of the indigenous rivals like Huawei, which has overtaken Apple in terms of global handset sales, Samsung, of course, from South Korea, and then other Chinese companies like Xiaomi. And these products, many Asians believe, many Chinese believe, are simply better. They have longer battery life, they have better pixels in their phones, they're cheaper, they're waterproof, all these other things. So I think Apple is in significant trouble in China, and this helps to explain why they are trying to really diversify their Asian footprint. One of the things that they announced in January after they had to concede, really subpar results in China was that they were going to rapidly begin to do the final assembly of their latest iPhone models in India as a concession to the Indian government to try to better access that market. So unless Apple can diversify beyond its dependence on China in Asia, it's going to be a downhill story for them.
Parag, the number of foreign companies that feel compelled to hand over technology in China for access to those markets has more than doubled from just a year ago. And that's really at the crux of what President Trump's been talking about, what really has sparked this trade fight. Any feeling that's going to get better? And also, conversely, you were talking about Apple. Is there a U.S.-based tech company that's better equipped to withstand this trade fight with China?
That's a really good question. I don't think that there's a generalizable answer. I think it depends a lot on sectors. On the one hand, we have examples of companies that are now being allowed to, wholly own their IP. You've got the example of Tesla. It has its own factory, its own showrooms, its own sales, 100% ownership of its operations there in China. Whereas others, as you rightly pointed out, still feel compelled to do joint ventures with technology transfer. And some are, again, compelled to do it, yes, but they also sort of willingly do it in the sense that they know that in doing so, they're going to have, at least in the short term, really enhanced presence and market share. And that refers to some of the chip manufacturers and what Intel, Qualcomm, and others have done in order to, retain their market position an advantage through joint ventures. Now, the trade war really, of course, messes with them. The trade war plus the export controls, not only the things that they can no longer export from here and sell to their Chinese customers, but the fact that the local competition is now stepping up very quickly. And what this trade war perversely does is indeed it incentivizes the Chinese companies to accelerate their Made in China 2025 campaign to have self-sufficiency in areas like chips, the way they've already done with electric cars and a whole range of other areas. So again, month to month, whether you're looking at a 3-month period, a 6-month period, a 12-month period, or a 5-year period, the answer to how this is going to affect America's leading technology companies, both in hardware and software, automotive, industry, and other areas, the answer will quite frankly vary. And the same logic applies to agriculture and energy as well.